Why? Why? All right. Welcome back to Vijñapti. I'm joined here again by Nick. Nick, you're our most recurring guest, so we love having you, and we love all the stuff that you bring to the table with Buddhism and all the other good stuff. So, good to see you again, sir.
Thanks for having me on. I love coming on and I love having these conversations with you. And hopefully, I turn into a piece of furniture on the show.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, so let's dive right in. So, Nick, would you mind telling us a little bit about your own uh, background professionally, academically, because we're going to be exploring a little bit about that today. So, if I understand correctly, you study Shingon Buddhism, and I believe that's Japanese Esoteric Buddhism. So, could you talk a little bit about your interests? I guess, and as well as a little intro to Shingon Buddhism, so we can kind of have that as the foundation for our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do study Shingon Buddhism. In particular, my current interests are in Kamakura period slash Muromachi period, Shingon Buddhist art and architecture, and
And
how.
what period is that? Sorry, like year.
No, that's good. Yeah. So the Kamakura period starts in 1185
Okay,
and ends in 1333, I believe. And that's the beginning of the Muromachi, which then I can never remember my dates. Let me
no, you're
find
fine.
that really quickly. 1573. So we're
Okay,
looking at basically late medieval art and architecture. And so particularly, I study art and architecture surrounding Shingon Buddhism or esoteric Buddhism in general, but particularly in the northern part of Japan. So,
okay,
for those of you that are listening and don't know, Japan is not currently and has not historically been only occupied by people who we would diagnosed as being ethnically Japanese. It's also been occupied by other ethnic groups, including the Ryukyu people and the Ainu people. The Ryukyu people primarily lived in the south, especially in where present day Okinawa is. There's also some Ryukyuan people in Taiwan as well. And the Ainu people lived in the north. So the northernmost island of Japan, Hokkaido, this has not always historically been within Japanese borders. It's actually a conquered area, a conquered place, and that's where a lot of Ainu people lived historically. There and the northern part of the main island, Honshu, uh, they lived in the northern part there. And so my studies are looking at building Buddhist temples as sort of a means of bringing together ethnically Japanese and ethnically Ainu peoples.
mhm.
Historically, these Ainu peoples were also called Emishi or Ezo people. So it's bringing together um, their cultures, their ethnicities, their religion, their history, their politics, and it's my work essentially looks at how these spaces are reflective of political agendas, cultural agendas that the Japanese people had on taking this land from these Ainu people, but also in sort of mixing and mingling with Ainu religion, Ainu culture, and Ainu politics, and even Ainu language. So there's a very wonderful example of a temple space in the northern part of Japan called Chusonji, and this is a fantastic space. Like it's one of my dream spaces to visit. Within this temple, there is a miniature temple which serves as a mausoleum, and it is completely covered. It's completely plated in gold. So the whole thing is gold. All the
Wow.
statues, the walls, the floors, everything is amazing to look at. I mean, it's a spectacular, and I've only seen pictures. I want to see this in person so
Yeah,
badly.
totally.
But what's special about this is that, unlike any other Buddhist mausoleum, it actually contains buried corpses instead of cremated remains, right? So these are like mummified, preserved corpses instead of cremated ashes. Um, as you may well know, Buddhism, their main funerary practice is cremation and more or less always has been. But this is a specific outlying case where family members of the Northern Fujiwara clan, the most powerful clan in medieval Japanese history, or a northern branch of it, I should say,
Mhm.
they had intermingled and intermarried with and sort of embedded themselves with the Emishi and Ainu community in the northern part of Japan. And as a result, we can see evidence of Ainu practices in their Buddhist world. And that is, they're being buried as corpses rather than being cremated. And that's an amazing thing. And it's a window through which we can see dimensions of Buddhism that we have not seen before, but also a window through which we can see dimensions of Ainu religion and culture that have since been lost because their language has more or less uh, gone into a phase where it has to be reconstructed and preserved, similar to the Navajo language. There's Ainu language schools in the northern parts of Japan where they do teach it still, but so much of it has been lost. There's no written records of Ainu people by Ainu people. It's only been by Japanese people who have gone into those lands and purported to take it away from them. And it's an amazing story of just sort of what we can learn about Japanese history, Ainu history, and Japanese and Ainu religion in history. And so that's just an example of a temple that I'm interested in. It's not the one that I want to study for my career, but it is a temple that sort of demonstrates this narrative of one, architecture as power. So you construct a temple in a place, you are literally putting a foundation or putting a foothold in a place. Also, a temple as a meeting place for culture and religion. Clearly, Buddhism and Ainu religion have come together in this place. And also shared history and shared ritual and shared economic networks and resources. And so it's an amazing sort of thing to study, sacred spaces, because it contains all of that inside of it. And that's sort of what I aim to do with my research, is to study more examples like that, where we can learn something more about Japan and about the Ainu people through these spaces and the narrative of their construction and how they were used and how their use changed over time.
Awesome. That's really cool. Thanks for that background. The first thing, and we'll probably kind of jump around a little bit from topic to topic. The first thing that I thought of when you said sacred spaces is Eliade. I believe it's
Mhm.
Eliade who came up with the notion of sacred spaces in his research. Um, I'm curious to know how, if Eliade affects your um, research, how it might affect your research, if like, yeah, what connections could you draw to Eliade here?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So Mircea Eliade and other theorists of religion that I have studied, all of their arguments, all of their work, they are all sort of in the air around us. They're clouds in our sky. And I say us, meaning like religion scholars in the 21st century.
Hmm.
Um, he's not the only one who's in our atmosphere. We have also, of course, we have Catherine Lofton consuming religion. You know, of course, we have Mircea Eliade. We have even feminist theories of religion like Mary Stone. I forget her full name. I read this book in school, which I highly recommend um, to anybody who's interested in studying religion. It's called 10 Theories of Religion, and the author is Daniel Pals, Pals. And he outlines um, all of these landmark theories of religion that we've encountered throughout religious studies as a field. It's history. And
Right.
it's always being added to. So it used to be eight, and now it's nine, and then 10, and then I think there's an 11 coming soon. And no doubt it'll keep going up. So
Yeah.
um, it starts with E.B. Tyler and J.G. Fraser, sort of the
Hmm.
first people to start to chart out what, the field of studying religion actually is. And it even includes Sigmund Freud, Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx, Max Weber, William James, Mircea Eliade, E. E. Evans Pritchard. Clifford Geertz and Mary Daly, not Mary Stone, but Mary Daly, the
Gotcha.
feminist scholar of religion.
Hmm.
And so they all, um, I'm going to use a metaphor that was in another thing that we watched and prepared for today. They are all different hands who are blind, touching a different part of the elephant, right?
Okay.
And they're all pulling out their piece of it. Um, and some of them have very, very big hands, right? They're touching a very
Yeah.
large part of the elephant, but none of them is touching the whole elephant, right?
Mhm.
And so his concept of the sacred and the profane and the separation between the two is functioning, so to speak, in how we look at these places, sacred spaces, but it is not the whole story.
Mhm.
And the reason why I say that is because Japanese religion and Japanese sacred spaces very frequently turn Eliada's sacred and profane and his forbiddenness, his sacred forbiddenness theory on its head a lot. A lot of
Mhm.
times it reinforces it, but sometimes it throws it on its head. And it would be our whole episode if I got into sort of how it relates, right? All the examples for and against his theorizations. But
Yeah, of
I think
course.
that um, the biggest takeaway is that we should rely on many, many different theorists in our analysis so that we can um, just get more of the elephant than somebody's individual touch on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it does. I I know that Eliada is also kind of, and a lot of these older guys have kind of fallen out of fashion as well. Um, just because, as early 20th century white guys, they are kind of have these colonialist, Eurocentric tendencies in their research, and that doesn't, make them bad human beings. It's kind of to be expected, I think.
Hmm.
But we are more cognizant of these kind of biases that affect, I guess, affect the research process itself, and kind of moving away from that. But okay, cool. So, let's get into some Shingon stuff. So, Japanese esoteric Buddhism. Could you tell me, I guess, a brief, summary of what is Shingon Buddhism, a little bit about the history of it, and some of the things that make Shingon Buddhism unique to, or unique in the Buddhist tradition?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have been often on this show using the terms esoteric Buddhism and Shingon Buddhism interchangeably. And that's appropriate. But we should note that Shingon is actually not the only esoteric branch of Buddhism in Japan. There is also actually Tendai, which has esoteric influences because of Saicho, the founder of Tendai Buddhism in Japan. He also studied under esoteric teachers in China. So I'm
Okay.
getting ahead of myself, but I just wanted to mention for our terminology, esoteric, for those listening, it doesn't just mean Shingon in Japan. It can also mean
Yeah.
Tendai. And after I've described a little bit of it, you'll see also that it kind of has its fingers in every pie. You know,
Yeah.
esoteric
So that,
Buddhism is
yeah.
sort of centrally influential on all other forms of Buddhism that come after it in Japan.
Hmm.
So the story goes that in the eighth or the ninth century, I believe it's the eighth century. Because the 700s is the eighth century, I always get confused if I'm saying the
Yeah.
right thing.
It's hard. It's hard to keep track of those.
Yeah. So up until that point, um, you know, Buddhism had only arrived in Japan 200 years prior, in the middle of the 500s, right? The sixth century. And there were important schools of Buddhism developing, and Buddhism was playing a huge, important role in Japanese history and culture by that point. Um, but then this guy comes around named Kukai, who we'll talk about, and he he becomes a scholar monk, and he advances in the ranks and you know gets lots of acclaim for his writing and his work. And he gets sponsored to go study in China,
Hmm.
where sort of the metropolis of Buddhism was thought to be, right?
Hmm.
All of these regions outside of China in this time period, such as Korea, modern day Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, even places in India and places to the west of China, which are now places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, etc.
Hmm.
They would send people to China because it was the hub. It was the middle country, right? It was the center
Yeah,
of the universe. And that's where all of the interesting stuff was going on.
the cosmopolitan hub
Exactly.
of that time.
Yeah, exactly. And Buddhism was enjoying a sort of a fantastic flourishing moment at the same time as having like persecutions carried out against it. So it's an interesting time in China. But,
Hmm.
anyways, during this time, esoteric Buddhism has found a great deal of favor with the Chinese dynasty, the Tang dynasty that's in power. And so Kukai gets to study with Hui Guo, and he gets to enter into the lineage of esoteric or Vajrayana Buddhism. And
Hmm.
so he and his friend Saicho, they both train with esoteric Buddhists, and they bring it back to Japan, and they found Shingon in the case of Kukai and Tendai in the case of Saicho.
Hmm.
And there's a very long and interesting story about their relationship, the two of them. They started out as friends, but then they had a falling out. And then it seemed like Kukai wanted to be friends, but then he died, and there's a whole thing. But um, he founds Shingon, and the word Shingon in Japanese translates to mantra, right? The characters, for those that know Japanese, are Shin, as in the case of true. You could also read it as ma in the case of like makuro, which means like pitch black, true or like extreme or pure, for example. And then gon is the same as language. So, or to say. So whenever we say um, watashi ga you, that verb you is to say. So it's referring to true language or true words or true sayings. And that is understood to be mantra. So
Hmm.
mantra are these very short phrases that you can say in Buddhism, which have power for some reason. And we'll no doubt discuss how and why they have power. But central to Shingon doctrine and practice is the use of mantra. These are absolutely critical. So you can think of mantra as sort of prayers, but in Shingon, it's very specific that they are prayers that work, or they are spells that work. And we'll talk about how and why they work definitively. There is no question in Shingon whether they work. In Christianity, you pray, and there's always the question of does God hear it? And if God hears it, does he care? Right? That is a perennial question that's been going on in Christianity since day one. But with Shingon, there is absolutely no question that it works. And the the difference also is that you're not praying to someone specific. It's like an incantation or an invocation. You are saying something into truth. And so we'll talk about that further on in the episode. But in addition to uh, mantra, they also practice mudra or hand poses, body poses, and mandala, which are visual representations of the mind, of consciousness, of the world, of the universe, of cosmology. And so it completely transforms Japanese Buddhism in so many ways to the point where Shingon cannot be really thought of in the same context as Chinese esoteric Buddhism or Tibetan Vajrayana, which is where Chinese esoteric Buddhism draws its roots from.
Hmm.
Um, these sort of things have branched off in the evolutionary tree, and now Tibetan Buddhism still exists and still has very many esoteric Shingon qualities, but it's its own thing, and Shingon is its own thing. So they're cousins now, but they're not entirely the same. So
Gotcha.
so Shingon has transformed Japanese Buddhism and culture in a huge way, and it became one of, if not the most influential, paired with Tendai, influential schools of Buddhism during the Heian period of Japan's history, 795 through 1185.
Hmm.
And it didn't just cut off at the end of that. The influence and its importance lasted long beyond that time period, but that was just the time where it had the most political and the most religious influence in Japan. And it's still very important and influential to this day. And I've mentioned on the show before, I go to a Shingon temple. And what happens at that temple is we say a lot of mantras, and that's what we do. We say a lot of
Gotcha.
mantras, and then we eat lunch together, and we hang out and have a good time. So
Yeah.
um, there's meditation, of course, and things like that, but um, we just say mantras. We
Yeah.
And it's important to note too, I should mention about mantras that they are only functional if they are rendered in Sanskrit. So whenever we say mantras in Shingon, we're actually saying Japanese pronunciations of Sanskrit phrases.
Hmm.
So that's very important. So if you just say what it means in translation, that's not the same thing as saying the words themselves. The words themselves are the things that have sacred power. And so whenever we say them in Japanese pronunciation, it's still thought to be close enough that it works. Um, so we don't say them in English. We chant primarily in Japanese at the temple. And mudras and mandalas are different. So mudras are initiatory. So I can't sit here and do mudras for you because like I would have to be officially transmitted these mudras from the monk at this temple, which I haven't been. And mandalas in Tibet, they very frequently create them with sand and then they blow it away. We all have heard of this, talking about impermanence and erasing, the remainders of mind so that you can reach nirvana. In Shingon, they don't create them as often, but they do refer to them as being sort of images of the universe, images of the entire world. We are all thought to be inside of that mandala. There's a great doctrine of inclusivity where even non-Buddhists and demons and Yogacara Buddhists and Zen Buddhists and Shingon Buddhists are all inside the mandala, and Buddhas and gods and any member of any of the six realms you can think of. So we refer to them doctrinally, but it's not really, we don't really practice creating them. We just chant for the most part.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for giving that introduction to a few other topics here. So I'll kind of I guess my next question is what so we've established that Shingon is one type of esoteric Japanese Buddhism. And thank you for that because I actually thought that it was the only one. I forgot about Tendai, or I guess I just thought it was more kind of I don't even know what I thought it was like actually. But that's important. Um, Taking a step back, what would you say is the essence of esoteric Buddhism that distinguishes it from, say, Mahayana, which I believe it's still technically kind of Mahayana, but it has some qualities that make it unique. And yeah, and then let's talk about kind of how that impacts the practices of mantra, mudra, and mandala, the famous three M's, I believe, in esoteric Buddhism. And let's talk a little bit about the video too. I had sent Nick a video on mystical knowledge by Dr. Justin Sledge, who is a scholar of esoteric religion. And it's cool because he's actually an independent scholar. He teaches philosophy like as his main job, but he does all of his religious studies stuff by himself in his channel. So he's an exceptional man, I would say. And he talks about mystical religion in this video that I had sent you. So um, let's let's try to tie that all together somehow. I'll let you take the reins.
Absolutely, yeah. So we should start, I think, in answering the questions you've posed by defining esoteric in the most general sense. So esoteric just means essentially something that very few like, you know, people who are in on it can
Hmm.
understand. So when you describe something as esoteric, it's not something that is easily understandable, easily sensible by just everybody.
Hmm.
There's very few people who can understand it. There's very few people who can get it. It's sort of like a rare path or a rare thing or a rare idea in that
Hmm.
sense that it's like only few can do it. So um, it has it's a descriptor that originates in the West to describe um, people who are practicing Western religions in a certain way.
Hmm.
Christian esoterics and Muslim esoterics and Jewish esoterics and so on and so forth. They are doing something specific to them that I don't know that much about, but I do know that it's different than Shingon, different than Vajrayana.
Sure.
So esoteric in the context of Shingon Buddhism or of esoteric Buddhism, which includes, of course, Shingon and Tendai, or of Vajrayana, which includes Shingon, Tendai, Tibetan Buddhism, and Mongolian Buddhism. Actually, I just recently learned. Um,
Okay.
in that context, it just means initiatory. So there are basically certain things in this type of Buddhism that must be kept secret. And the reason why they say that it must be kept secret is because it is very powerful information. And this information can act like a rocket ship. And if you are not initiated, if you don't have proper context, if you're not trained up, if you're not in a mental state where you can receive it and understand it correctly and interpret it correctly and internalize it the right way, it can be a rocket ship to one of the Buddhist hells. But if you are in the proper position, it can be a rocket ship to the Buddhist heavens. So it's sort of, I guess you could say,
Or at least
volatile.
a higher hell, at least a higher level hell
Yeah,
than previous one.
exactly. Yeah, it's volatile information. Um,
Gotcha.
and so interestingly, while there is all of this ritual and tradition around this secretiveness, the secret is open. So
Mm.
this is where the sacred and the profane falls apart with regard to Shingon Buddhism.
Uh-huh.
Mircea Eliade would look at Shingon Buddhism and he would say the sacred is all the secret stuff.
Mm.
Sacred and secret share word roots in a lot of ways. You know what I'm saying? So like these, he would say, obviously, the initiatory stuff, the stuff that is behind the wall,
Hmm.
that's the stuff that's sacred. But none of that stuff is behind the wall,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. And well,
Yeah.
I can explain a little bit more when we talk about Kukai's life in particular, how that is the case, why that is the case. But um,
Sure.
regardless, that is the distinguishing feature of Shingon is that um, very much of the teaching, very much of the knowledge of the doctrine is initiatory, meaning that it's closed. They won't share it with you if you just ask, right?
Yeah.
There are mudras that I am not allowed to know because I'm not a monk. I'm not on a monk track at the temple.
Yeah.
There's sutras and parts of sutras that I'm not allowed to know. Um, I can Google these mudras and I can Google these sutras and I can look at them and I can read them. But the teaching, the official teaching is that if I do so, then I risk going to hell for a very long time. Because
Yeah.
in Buddhist hell, you're not there forever like Christian hell, but you're there for a very long time. So
Yeah.
I risk committing a grave crime because um, it's just the information is just too powerful
Yeah.
in that
I think
sense.
that, yeah, I think this would be a great segue into Shingon cosmology. I I had asked that. I had also asked the question, what is magic in this context or just in general? I know that's a very open-ended question, but kind of as you're saying this, I'm thinking of like, I don't know, like any number of martial arts movies where it's like you're not advanced enough to use this skill and like you have to like go through all this training. And the reason is because if you misuse it, you could, I don't know, blow a hole through a building with a Getsuga Tensho or whatever. But it points to something that I think is like very intuitive about the mind. And to me it says that I don't even know. I don't know what I think it says, but um yeah, you see it it's almost kind of like well, I'll ask you. I won't try to make my own judgments here just yet, but what do you think that says kind of about the mind? How does what does Shingon cosmology have to say about um why people can't learn these teachings and yeah, what does it, I guess, say about intuitions about consciousness, let's say?
Absolutely, yeah. So the cosmology, in part, is the open secret that I've been talking about, and I've shared it on the show before. It's the idea, of course, that all of reality is the Dharmakaya of the main Buddha of Shingon Buddhism, Mahavairachana in Sanskrit, or Dainichi Nyorai in Japanese. Um, Basically, the entire world we live in, the entire universe, the entirety of reality is composed of his Dharma body. So Buddhas have three types of bodies. They have a Nirmanakaya, which is their physical, historical body, like Shakyamuni's body, if he existed, which we're pretty sure he did. um,
Mm-hmm.
the Sambhogakaya, which comes to you through meditation or whenever you reach a certain level of enlightenment. This translates into celebration body or transformation body. It's the Buddha that you see when you visualize. So whenever you are visualizing the Pure Land, according to Pure Land Buddhist practice, you're building up the Pure Land step by step. You imagine a sunset, and then you imagine the ground, and then you imagine the water, and then the trees, and then the pedestal that the Buddha sits on, and then the Buddha himself. The Buddha that appears to you in that visualization is the Sambhogakaya. And the Dharmakaya is the highest level of sort of enlightenment. If you've ever seen Star Wars, A New Hope, when Obi-Wan Kenobi just dissolves,
Mm-hmm.
whenever Vader strikes at him, he strikes with like, the intent to decapitate, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't see a body or a head in the movie. He just kind of goes away and his robe just kind of collapses.
Yeah.
And where did he go? Well, canonically, he chose that moment to sort of dissolve into the force and become one with the force again, right? And so the
Okay.
Dharmakaya is sort of like the state of being dissolved into the force.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
so I mean, that's kind of it's a bad analogy, but
No, no, I think it's a useful one. I mean, a lot of people know that scene in Star
yeah.
Wars. Uh, yeah. So, getting into the question of magic, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, mudras, I'm thinking of Naruto where they're weaving all those hand signs, and
Mhm.
that actually does come from like, some sort of, I think that's maybe has more to do with what's that, Shinto? Maybe not. I could be making that up, but
It's kind of
um,
meant to be like both. It's kind of meant to fuse. It's like Shinto names and spells, but with like esoteric Shingon mudras.
gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, so um, yeah, when I say the word magic, like I'm kind of being a little playful about it, but also not, because there are people now and historically who have practiced what they call magic, and it involves doing hand signs, casting spells, creating pentagrams and glyphs and all this stuff. Um, how would you summarize what magic is? And then I'm interested to know what implications you think that has on consciousness. I know that's really open-ended, but yeah, I'm curious what you think here.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess I should say in Mahayana Buddhism, there is a tradition, an understanding that once you reach a certain level of enlightenment, you gain certain psychic powers.
Mm,
So we'll get to a lot of Shingon magic in just a second, but I wanted to mention that it is not without context. So
hmm
often people who are detractors of esoteric Buddhism, they'll say, well, like, magic isn't real and the Buddha never did magic and blah, 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 blah. Um,
mm.
but he did. um,
Yeah.
it might be in sutras that you don't agree with or think are canonical, but he did in those sutras. Whether he did in real life or not doesn't matter. Mahayana Buddhism accepts the truth of magic. Um,
hmm
at least in some form or the other. So these limited forms of magic for like a more conservative approach would be like um, having a mind-made body that is like a body that you make in your mind that can travel through different realms of meditation or different Buddha realms, visit bodhisattvas and Buddhas elsewhere.
Like astral
Like
projection almost.
exactly like that, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Um, or so that's a limited form, but then it gets more and more like complicated. So you can double yourself, you can go in between walls, you can fly. Um, Especially when Buddhism gets to China, where Taoism is a big deal, flying around becomes a lot more prevalent.
Hmm.
People, because in Taoism, when you're an immortal sage, you can fly around, and so just in the same way, you can fly around whenever you reach a certain level of enlightenment. And so
Yeah.
in Shingon Buddhism,
Helps to travel and spreading the Dharma and all that.
exactly, yeah, yeah, exactly. And it helps you visit all the different like realms of demons and hell dwellers and pretas and all that stuff to preach to them. So in Shingon Buddhism, with this context in mind, this magical context in mind, related to the cosmology being Vairocana, Vairocana, Dainichi, has magical powers. He's the Buddha of the whole entire cosmos. He is
Mm,
the entire universe and all of reality itself. So he
mm,
can do whatever. He can make whatever happen. And whenever he's doing it, who is doing it? And that's a real question. I mean, if somebody is the entire universe and everything and everyone in it, when he does something, is it him doing it or is it people in his universe doing it? Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Whenever I am, whenever I'm slicing meat on a cutting board with my hands and a cutting board and a knife, right? Am I cutting the meat or is the knife? Does
Mm,
that make sense?
yeah.
They're both true because I'm in control. I have the knife in my hand, but the knife is the actual sharp thing cutting. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
And
And
we all
in
have our individual agency, but it's still the whole cosmos and Shingon is still Mahavairokana.
exactly. And because of that, there's this sort of coextensive nature between like our nature and his nature to the point that with prayer, with mantra, or with mudras or these things, we can sort of execute actions on the world, right? And I'm giving this as like a doctrinal explanation, like an insider doctrinal explanation. I'm skeptical and cynical, and many who listen might be as well. And you might just say this is all hooey nonsense. And I wouldn't blame you. I seriously wouldn't blame you. I'm just telling you, like, this is what they say is the case. So,
Hmm.
so whenever we say a mantra, mantras are special and they are given in Sanskrit because they are words of Vairocana. They are words of the Buddha. And words spoken by an enlightened individual have more power and more weight than just words that we're speaking, just everyday normal words. Um, Not as much as you would think, because all words are interconnected with all other words in Shingon.
Hmm.
So they're all very important. But mantra have a specific effect on the world. And so when we say them, it is both a cause and an effect of them being true.
Hmm.
Now, that's a very complicated thing. I'm going to give you an example. The most frequent one that we chant in the temple is the light mantra, known in Japanese as the Komyo Shingon. And the Komyo Shingon goes like this. On abokyabe rosha no maka bodaramani handoma jinbara harabari taya un. That's a Japanese rendering of a Sanskrit phrase, which I don't know the Sanskrit for, but I know that the translation is in a lot of ways not sensible and not really important. It's having to do with a great spell of crossing the shore of liberation and having to do with Vairocana and uh,
Hmm.
reaching enlightenment and praising enlightenment and so on and so forth. But the reason that we chant it is sort of because it invokes the totality of all of the Dharma and because of invoking that, it's like us preaching the entire Dharma. So whenever we give that mantra, it's like we are living the life of the Buddha and we are preaching everything he ever preached, all in those 23 Sanskrit letters. So it's like an immediacy of it's like the only other way to think about it is like imagine if you could say a sentence and and in that sentence, in a compressed zipped folder like on a computer, you were reciting the entire Bible, you know
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people think the Lord's Prayer is in some cases, but like seriously, I mean, it's a very like condensed sort of matrix of words. And
Yeah.
so
Is it
obviously
actually is it actually like linguistic? Like, can you kind of chart out different stuff into that sentence or mantra, or is it like metaphorically, not metaphorically? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
it is kind of metaphorically or figuratively.
Uh-huh.
You can't really connect it linguistically and like, when I say like a zip folder, you can't unzip it really,
Uh-huh.
like
It,
on paper.
yeah.
Doctrinally and figuratively you can, but um, linguistically you can't really unzip it. So the point of that being is that like
All right, no, well, I guess I kind of did mean doctrinally. Like, can you tie different sutras to um those, or like could you kind of explain how in Shingon cosmology that works, like how it's distilled, or like what explanation is given for why that's a distillation of this cosmic knowledge from Mahavairocana?
sort of, yeah. So it's difficult because it goes both ways in the sense that it's like um there's a lot of missing context here. So
Mm,
we should also note that the cosmology of Shingon contains in it a lot of kami worship cosmology as well. And so the presence of spirits and their activities um, with regards to the world, that's kind of something that's not original to Buddhism,
mm,
um, but it's contained within this. So, and there's also a tradition that comes before Shingon Buddhism of reciting sutras. So what I should say is the meaning of the words in this mantra, it doesn't really matter that much. The
mm,
translation I've just found online by Professor Mark Unno is praise be to the flawless, all pervasive illumination of the great mudra. Turn over to me the jewel, lotus, and radiant light.
mm,
So the point of all of that is is basically like, how should I say? In Nichiren Buddhism, we say Namu Myoho Renge Kyo as a mantra. And the reason why is because that invokes the entire Lotus Sutra. Nichiren Buddhism places a lot of emphasis on the Lotus Sutra. And
mm,
by speaking the name of it, it's thought of that you are sort of giving the whole teaching. And because you're giving the whole teaching, you know, to give the Lotus Sutra, to preach the Lotus Sutra, or to preach the entire Dharma, as in the case of Shingon, is incredibly, immeasurably good karma.
mm,
And whenever you do a lot of good karma all at once, it has a domino effect. Everything and everyone around you gets something out of it, right? The point of karma being a matter of non self in Buddhism is that if I do something good and I'm not totally in a vacuum, entirely by myself, then my doing something good will lead to good results for other people as well. And it will change their behavior for the good. And it's like a chain reaction. So whenever I say this, I'm preaching to everyone around me. I'm preaching to the spirits. I'm preaching to the universe itself, and I'm causing Mahavajracana great joy because
mm.
he preaches the Dharma to himself for his own delight. So I'm sort of spinning the wheel of the Dharma just with that sentence, if that makes sense. And that has
Yeah.
sort of the same effects as a spell,
Uh-huh.
or it's said to.
Right.
Because of the truth of non-self and the truth of karma being a non-self thing, whenever I say that and I gain all of that good karma from it, everyone around me does through merit transfer as well. And so it's sort of like all boats rise on the same waters. I'm filling up all the waters and all the boats are rising, including mine. And in that way, it banishes or purifies bad karma or evil spirits or what have you. And it's supposed to sort of be a reflection of everyone and everything's nature as being Vairocana, and also sort of causing that to be the case. That's why it's
Hmm.
complicated to think of it as a cause and an effect of the words being true. It's it breaks away that causational way of thinking in a very interesting way.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. Are you familiar with Alfred North Whitehead?
No, I've never heard of him.
He was a mathematician in the early 20th century and the late 19th century, and he has very interesting ideas on causality and essentially kind of what he says. I haven't read too much of him yet, but he basically says that causality doesn't really, and I don't know if maybe I'm drawing connections that might not be there, but he basically says causality doesn't occur in the sense of like event A kind of causes B and pushes it forward into the future. He says, almost like attractor theory, there's something in the future that pulls all the events that are occurring in the present forward towards itself in the future. I don't know if that um, kind of parallels with what you were saying at all, but I do get that there are ways of thinking about causality that don't necessarily fall into this sequential first this,
Hmm.
then that. Did that kind of parallel anything maybe or
Yeah, it kind of does. In Shingon Buddhism, um, particularly in Japanese Shingon Buddhism, there are two mandalas which are very important: the diamond realm and the womb realm.
hmm,
And as the name entails, the womb realm is the realm of possibility and potential and of cause. And the diamond realm is of, if one is potential, then diamond realm is realized. And if one is cause, then the diamond realm is effect. And so these are not two different pictures of two different places. These are thought to be this reality right now, just from two different points of view. Maybe you could say the unenlightened and the enlightened point of view, but they're
hmm,
both simultaneously true at the same time. And in that way, everything is both a cause and an effect of Dainichi Nyorai, of him being the entire universe. So whenever you say something that invokes maybe the doctrine of Buddha nature, Buddha nature is interesting because it's kind of a circular argument in some ways. If you don't believe you have it, then you don't have it. You will never realize it. But if you believe you have it, then you will realize it. You know what I mean? If you're a
yeah,
detractor of the Dharma and you're like, I don't agree with Buddha nature, that's a stupid doctrine. Nobody
uh-huh,
should believe that.
hmm,
Then you won't have Buddha nature. You won't realize it, even though
hmm,
everybody has it. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of
yeah,
everyone believing they have it.
uh-huh,
It's a matter of faith and practice. Um, so if you invoke Buddha nature, the understanding is yes, every sentient being everywhere does have it. But by
hmm,
invoking that, you're also convincing people and you're increasing the amount of people who believe in their Buddha nature. They have faith in their Buddha nature. And thereby, you know, what you're saying about Buddha nature is both an effect of the fact that it's already there, but a cause for it to be realized. And so it's interesting in that way. And so the mantra of light, as an example, or the Heart Sutra, invoking emptiness, or
hmm,
any of the other mantras that we chant, they are doing the exact same thing. They are sort of bridging both categories of cause and effect, unrealized and realized, potential and reality in that way.
hmm, yeah. Um, do you see any parallels between that and like quantum theory? I know neither of us are quantum physicists or anything, but kind of like I guess what I'm thinking is like an electron's position in space is indeterminate until it's observed. And so in that way it has I'm pretty sure they talk about it that way, like potentiality of being localized, but it's not actualized until it's like observed by researchers, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's kind of like that. I think that it's something like you could say the womb realm is the wave aspect of an electron, and the diamond realm is the particle aspect, or
hmm,
something like that, because it's a wave until it's a particle. You know what I mean? It's,
uh, okay.
or you know what I mean?
I
It's
don't know
kind
that
of,
much about physics, admittedly. I was just kind of seeing what I could throw out there, but
well, that's what I mean. Like you think of it in terms of a cloud, right? It could be anywhere in this cloud,
oh,
and then you look at it
yeah.
So it's
Because
kind
it's
of like
more
a
like,
cloud in the womb realm, and then it's
yeah,
a particle in the diamond realm.
yeah, yeah. Because now that I think about it, it's like an electron cloud, like you're
Yeah.
saying, it's a field. It's not like a part, or I don't know.
It doesn't have a determined place in space. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
And it is similar to that. And by sort of chanting the mantra, you're speaking to both, and you are recognizing the simultaneity of the truth of both. So, just because we say that the diamond realm is sort of the realized mandala, the effect mandala, the enlightened mandala, as opposed to the potential or the cause or the unenlightened, whatever, the womb realm mandala is not less important, and it's not inferior. It doesn't speak to an inferior world or an inferior truth or a less true thing or anything like that. It doesn't contradict um, the diamond realm mandala in any way. It
Mhm.
is just two different ways of looking at the same thing. And so, in that way, it's just as enlightening, just as enlightened as the diamond realm one. And
Mhm.
so it's very interesting to think about and understand the relationship between these two mandalas and how mantra functions and how it sort of functions on in both modes of reality, so to speak.
Yeah. Um, okay, cool. So, I'd love to get more into this discussion about cosmology, and I think this would actually be interesting place to talk about sacred spaces like you
Mhm.
um, were mentioning earlier. So, um, maybe we can do this one at a time, but I feel like they might connect. So, from what I understand about Shingon Buddhist cosmology, um, language is one of the key primary ontological features of reality. And from my understanding, as you're saying, the world is language. The world literally is, you said Mahavairokkana, speaking, and then I guess we're like words of
Mhm.
Mahavairokkana. Um, so there's that, and I'd love to know what impact that has then on practice. So specifically mantra, and then I guess maybe mudra and mandala. Um, and then with mandala, from what I understand, and I might be confusing something here, but I believe there are two mandalas as well that represent the diamond realm and the womb realm, or
Yeah,
maybe.
these are the mandalas I'm speaking of. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Um, okay, that makes sense. So if I understand correctly, there's like two different if you go to Mount Koya in Japan, which is where Kukai built his temple, there's like two different buildings or something like that,
Mhm.
and they each represent one of the different mandalas.
Mhm.
Um, I might be remembering wrong, but yeah, I guess if you could kind of speak to those aspects and um yeah, let's see what we can find.
Yeah, so I'll start with the speech language words thing. So, um, in Shingon Buddhism, words and speech and language have a somaticity. They have a physicality,
Mm.
and that is sort of how they affect the world.
What do you mean by somaticity? And yeah.
Somatic, kind of like the word body, like like somatic something. So it has a body to it. And the reason why I say that is because there's a non-dual relationship or a non-dual situation between the words of the Dharma given by Mahavairochana, by Dainichi, and us. There's a non-dual relationship. So we can read his Dharma, we can hear his Dharma, um, and it'll be presented to us in words, in characters, right? In letters on a page, whatever. But also rocks, trees, people, animals, feelings, emotions, ideas, even inanimate stuff, buildings, these are all also words of his Dharma. So we cannot and should not draw a strict categorical distinction between like the shape of letters on a page and
Mhm.
ourselves. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Yeah,
You know,
it's very trippy.
it is, yeah. So if you think of the letter G, right, that is just as much a component of the Dharma of Dainichi Nyorai
Mhm.
as, my liver is a component of me. and I am a component of the entire Dharma as well. And
Hmm.
because of that non-dual relationship, because of that fundamental sameness between us, that means that the things that we say have power, and that's how mantras work.
Hmm.
We are speaking the Dharma and doing the Dharma. We are making real, making somatic, making physical the Dharma because
Hence
we are
true
the
word.
Dharma made physical.
Yeah. Hence true word Buddhism.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in that regard, it's um, mantra is, as you can see, very central to Shingon Buddhism. Um, so that's like the relationship specifically with speech. In
Hmm.
Vajrayana Buddhism, it is also understood that we all potentially, situationally, share a non-dual relationship with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas ourselves.
Hmm.
And that is because, you know, it's because of the truth of the doctrine of Buddha nature. We all have Buddha nature, the potential for Buddhahood. And it's also true simply because of the fundamental sameness, oneness of everything in reality, right? I'm coextensive with my environment because I'm made up of pieces of it at the microscopic level and at the macroscopic level and at the psychological and the spiritual level and at the cultural level and linguistic level. And in this, because of this, we are sort of in the same family, the same gotra, the same clan as the Buddha. So whenever we do the same poses with our bodies that Buddhas have done in the form of mudras, then we are sort of making real Buddhahood in this very body. In Japanese, that concept is Sokushin Jobutsu, reaching or attaining or realizing Buddhahood in this very body. And so by doing the same poses that he did, we're living his life again. We're living his life. We're not performing it. We are him living through us again, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. The Dharma
No,
wheel
it does.
spinning is like, it's not we can't think of it chronologically as though like there was a Buddha that lived and died. And now anything that happens after that is either mimicking him or replicating him, but it's us putting on our Buddha shoes. And you know what I mean? It's not like that at all.
Yeah.
It is sort of the reality of him continuing to live through, continuing to show through. And our individual identities don't matter because there is no self because
Hmm.
of shunyata, non self. So as a result, whenever we do these things, we're sort of being Vairachana, we're being Shakyamuni, we're being whoever. So,
Gotcha.
so that's mudra, and we've done mantra. Now, mandala
Hmm.
is a visual representation of um, all of reality, of course, but also of mind and consciousness. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
so, an important component of Alaya Vijnana doctrine, especially in Shingon Buddhism, is that it's not my Alaya Vijnana. It's not your Alaya Vijnana. Our two Alaya Vijnanas don't like do this whenever we talk or interact. It doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
Um, Importantly, it's also not a situation where there is one singular Alaya Vijnana and we're all plugged into it. That's not how it works either.
Hmm.
There's a lot of like wooey stuff in relation to Buddhism, which is not really actually canonical, which says there is one consciousness, one grand capital C consciousness, and we
Hmm.
are all sort of participating in it and we're all contributing to it and we're all part of it. Think of like an ocean with many rivers and many streams coming off of it. That's
Uh-huh.
not how it's depicted in the sutras either. Um, there's not a good descriptor or a good answer for what it actually is if it's not those two extremes. So it must be just something in the middle. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I'm
And that
thinking
makes
of
that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, it does. I'm thinking of the phrase the one in the many and the many in the one, and that
Hmm.
it recognizes the singularity of, I guess, existence, but it also recognizes the multiplicity of it as well. Like
Hmm.
we have individual minds and bodies and so on and so forth.
And
Um,
and importantly, both are simultaneously true. They are equally true, and neither is more or less true than the other. So it's not more correct to think of or emphasize or focus on the one than it is to do so for the many. And that's something that's very important. So in Shingon Buddhism, what we're speaking of here essentially is, this doctrine of relativity I've been talking about. Um, and in the case of multiplicity or in the case of monism, you know, either one is a valid window through which to sort of see the middle point between the two. And consciousness is understood in the same way. And mandala are reflections of that. So um, whenever we, especially in Shingon Buddhism, whenever we sort of have a mandala, it consecrates sort of a space where all of reality is occurring. It is sort of demonstrating or performing the truth of the many and the one and the one and the many. It's because that's how emptiness and dependent origination is understood in Shingon, is as being like, through any singular thing, you can come to understand relationships and natures of all other things in reality. And so this mandala is sort of like capturing the universal in a space and pointing to us to the fact that you can capture the universal in a singular, or a singular in a universal.
Hmm.
And this is very important when it comes to the temples you were talking about, um, and in Shingon architecture and art. So
Yeah.
sacred spaces, you know, according to Mircea Eliade, they are spaces which are specific for religious practice and which have special esteem and special respect attributed to them for being religious, for being significant, for having something cleaner or more pure or more special or more divine than the rest of the world. So
Hmm.
the outhouse, down the road, that is not a sacred space, but the church down the road on the other direction is, because you
Sure.
poop in one and you don't poop in the other, right? And
Yeah.
that's, I mean,
Hopefully they have bathrooms at that church.
yeah,
So walk back and forth too much.
exactly. Yeah. But essentially, you're not, the point is like there's prescribed practices and prescribed levels of significance, levels of, how you understand these things. So in Shingon Buddhism, it's very common in temple spaces to create three-dimensional mandalas making use of statues. So if
Hmm.
you look at the diamond realm mandala or the womb realm mandala, you'll see an array of different Buddhas rendered iconographically in that mandala. And they'll be in a specific arrangement, in a specific shape, in a specific location relative to each other. And as part of creating a temple, oftentimes, especially in the medieval period in Japan, they would render these arrangements, these arrays of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in three dimensions using statues. And so these temples themselves became the mandala. They became the mandala in real life. They became like, I don't know any other way to say it. It's not a performance of the mandala. It's not a performative sort of thing. It's like it brought the mandala into reality in a way that the paper doesn't,
Hmm.
but the paper kind of does.
Yeah.
Um,
So it sacralizes or I guess its sacralization, that's a word, is like the mandala literally coming into physical existence through these temples.
Sort of, yeah, because it's sort of like a reflection of the truth of the mandala, because it's here. It is this. It is in front of us.
Hmm.
So just like the diamond in the womb realm mandala, you can see, one through the other and the other through the one. Similarly, in this world and in the Pure Land of Dainichi Nyorai, of
Hmm.
Mahavajracana, which is called in Japanese Mitsugon, which means like a secret garden. Um, they're making real that land here in front of us because it has a non-dual relationship with being over there, if that makes sense. So it's
Uh-huh.
like, for example, it might be easier to understand what's going on here through Pure Land temples. So Pure Land temples will often have a trio of statues, Amida and Samantabhadra on one side, and then Avalokiteshvara on the other side. And this is sort of the Amida triad. It's very common. And the reason for that is because when you die and go to Amida's Pure Land, that's the trio that you see in front of you. And so you're making this world into the Pure Land by having that statue program. And so this world is this world, but it is also the Pure Land. And when you
Hmm.
go to that space, it is a sacred space, but it is sort of the linchpin. It is the foothold for the truth of the fact that this world is also the Pure Land, right?
Gotcha.
And so the same is true of these statue programs in Shingon. In fact, the Pure Land Buddhists borrowed this from Shingon.
Mhm.
These statue programs, these arrays of Buddhism bodhisattvas, they are reflections of the truth of the Dharma, of the truth in the existence. They're a foothold of the truth in the psychologies of all the practitioners that this realm, this cosmology is capital T true. It's capital R real. It's not something you read on a page or look at in an artist's rendering or in a picture. It is here. Like you can walk around and be surrounded by it. And that's very actually important ritualistically. So these statue programs, these three-dimensional mandalas, are often used as initiatory spaces. So,
Mhm.
like practitioners will be getting initiated with all of the Buddhas present, and that's something that happens in the sutras. In the sutras, you're supposed to be initiated first by summoning all the Buddhas to this space and sort of purifying the space of evil spirits and preaching for a while and then doing the initiation ritual. Now they're here. With the
Mhm.
statue program, they are physically here and they're people shaped. You know what I mean? And they're like 6.5 feet tall and they have clothes. And you're about 6 feet tall and you have clothes. And
Mhm.
like you share this space with them. It in a real when I say it realizes the sutras, it realizes the Dharma. I can't stress how literally I mean that. It
Mhm.
makes it happen in front of you. And it's not performative, it's demonstrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like it's uh it's it's literal in other words, at least in Shingon Buddhism. Uh
Exactly.
I there's a phrase that I like a lot from Terence McKenna, and that's the felt moment of immediate experience. And I love that quote because one, the emphasis on experience, but two, the notion that it's something immediately realized.
Mhm.
It's not like, this abstract, again, kind of like esoteric, nebulous thing out there. In this case, it's like, no, it's all of these concepts being literally rendered in three-dimensional space or existence or whatever in real time. And that's just so beautiful. I love that. I love that interpretation. Um, but yeah, I what was I going to ask next? Yeah, um, so this the sacralization, I know that, again, Eliade has kind of fallen a lot out of fashion, but um I I do like keep hearing this recurring theme of like sacred spaces and um what effect that has on practice. Um I kind of want to take like a psychological approach, I guess, for a minute. What do you think that all this stuff, not just architecture and sacred spaces, but mantra, mudra, mandala, um, all these ideas, like, I guess, is there anything that we can say Shingon says, or if not says, points to through these different religious concepts about the nature of the mind? What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think that so much of the non-duality stuff and so much of the power of language and of body poses of mandala speaks to um, speaks to the mind, speaks to the nature of mind as being sort of like a an open container with no walls, so to speak.
Hmm.
So,
So like empty
Buddhism,
space,
so like what?
like empty space.
Sort of, sort of. So you know how in Buddhism, the delusion of the existence of a self, of a capital S self, is
Hmm.
to impose upon an aggregation of things this category, these boundaries, this sort of specific discrimination that this is self and that is not. And an easy one to do is to think that body is self and that anything that body touches, that body is not sort of attached to or attached with, that is not body, that is not self, right? So clothes are not self, but torso is, right? Um, when we erase that, you know, none of the aggregations go away. When we erase the delusion of self, none of the aggregates disappear. We don't like actually dissolve into a puddle when that happens.
Mhm.
So that's why I say an open container with no walls. Whenever you take away the container, everything's still sort of in it. It's just in the rest of the soup also. And so the mudra mantra mandala, these also sort of reflect that truth in a way. The reason why spells work, the reason why when I preach or when I recite the light mantra, the Komyo Shingon, the reason why it works on me and on you and on everybody who listens to this is because we are all in the same soup. And there's
Mm.
some consciousness in that soup, right?
Mhm.
Or else we wouldn't sort of be able to learn and understand the Dharma and be, you know, and we wouldn't be the universe aware of itself, right?
Yeah.
But there's also stuff that isn't consciousness in it, you know.
Mhm.
Um, think of it like a very large abstract watercolor, and the blues are consciousness, and every other color isn't. But we're all sort of mixed together, and so for that reason, there's these sort of secret, um, but sort of usable um, relationships and connections that
Mhm.
all the blues have to each other, and thus we can sort of um, cause things to happen. We can cause things to happen by speaking them into existence, by posing them into existence, or by sort of existing them into existence. And I just
Mhm.
went through the three mysteries. Speaking them into existence is mantra, posing them into existence is mudra, and existing them into existence is mandala.
Okay.
So, what's important is that I don't want you to think that all of this speaks to an issue of no mind, as
Mm.
in there is no nature of the mind of consciousness because there is no mind, there is no consciousness. That's not what we're saying here.
Mhm.
But we're also not saying that there is a multiplicity of consciousnesses in the sense that there are a bunch of different closed containers containing minds that are all fundamentally different and independent from each other. And there's
Yeah.
also not a bunch of open containers either, where you can connect, but you don't always.
Mhm.
There's still that sort of identity with it. There is no individual identity, but there still is, you know, a consciousness that allows me to be, you know, aware and one that allows you to be aware. And these can be shared. They can have connections and so on and so forth, but they are still yours and mine. This is why relativity is such an important thing because like individuality is possible and is important and is accepted in Shingon Buddhism, but so too is the complete opposite, right? It really gets close to the issue of the middle way and of Nagarjuna's type of philosophy because, you know, um, it goes one step further from saying, the truth is actually somewhere in between two extremes, and it says both extremes are actually true at the same time. And
Gotcha.
and it presents itself as the middle in
Mm.
between the two. So do we have individual, minds in jars that are insulated and that constitute a capital S self? Yes. Do we have no individual identity, no mind at all, no consciousness at all? Yes. Is there a truth somewhere in the middle that expresses itself as everyday reality? Yes.
Mm.
You know what I mean? All of it is
Yeah.
simultaneously just as true as the next thing, all at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah. Like it's not just as simple as and I'll invoke the idea of panpsychism here, which basically says that reality itself is conscious. And that's I believe that that is also from Alfred North Whitehead. Like in other words, he would say that atomic particles have consciousness. Um, uh, DNA has consciousness. He posited this consciousness and nature thing, But he also wasn't saying that we're all only like that our individuality doesn't exist. In other words, he's not
Mm.
saying that there's no separation or no distinction between frogs and human beings. We do share consciousness at the material level in his view, but um, I'm also not a frog. I'm me, you're you. So it's not just as simple as like, oh, we're all the same consciousness, but it's also not that. Um, yeah, it's very complex, and that's one of the reasons I love Buddhism so much. Um, is yeah,
Yeah, and
the
I think that applies very well, what you've just described.
yeah. Um, thanks. That's cool to know that there's some resonance there. Okay, so we've covered a lot about Shingon Buddhism. I kind of want to wrap up by asking you what you thought about the video, what you thought about uh, Dr. Sledge's insights on mysticism and how we can think about mysticism. Shingon is very mystical in my view, and although there's obviously distinctions between Shingon Buddhism and Western esotericism, I think there's a lot of similarities, and I believe he mentions Buddhist enlightenment at one point. So what did you think of the video, and can you tie any connections to our discussion on Shingon Buddhism?
Absolutely, yeah. So, for context, for those who haven't seen it, the video was of Dr. Sledge exploring how far philosophical methods could get us in deciding or understanding or evaluating the validity and the veridity or the truth of mystical experiences and the claims that come from them.
Mm,
Mystical experiences are very prevalent in the world's major religions. He argues that Muhammad receiving the teachings of Islam from the angel Gabriel and the Buddha under the Bodhi tree and all other religious, founders who had these mystical experiences. These are all mystical experiences which are ineffable and are transformative and lead to claims about the nature of reality and the nature of everything in it.
hmm
And his question is, do we, with philosophy, do we have any method, any tools that we can pull out of the toolbox to say this is true, this is valid, this is, not true, not valid? Um, and it's important that we ask that question because science can't.
mm,
Science can look at the psychology of a mystical experience, but it can't say, oh, yeah, when Muhammad received from the angel Gabriel that there is one God, Allah, we can't prove or disprove that. You know, we can look at
right,
Muhammad's brain and see what parts of it are firing off at one point or the other, but we can't
right,
from that decide Allah is real or not real,
yeah,
you know? And so um, he was saying, well, does philosophy, does religious studies have anything for that? And um, what was important about how he defined mystical experiences was that one, they are ineffable. He described them as a black box. So the person who has it experiences it and understands it, but no one from the outside can share the content, the reality of that experience because it's me, looking in on somebody else. I can't be that person. I can't be Muhammad, receiving the teaching from Gabriel. So how could I ever understand or realize or experience that experience myself? Because it's not me. Um, and it's also what he calls a noetic experience, noesis. This is an experience which leads to divine knowledge, knowing something, and then
mm,
saying it about, religion, about the world, about the universe.
hmm
Um, he does lump in Buddhism and Buddhist enlightenment into the mystical experience category. And I understand why he does. Um,
hmm
a strong argument can be made that it is a mystical experience and a noetic experience. Um, but
You mean
just be
Buddhist enlightenment?
Buddhist enlightenment, yeah.
Mm.
But just because I'm going to say that there are also ways where it is not that. Just
How,
because I want to play the devil's advocate, I want to sort of make a case for Buddhist enlightenment not being a mystical experience in the same way that Muhammad receiving the teaching from Gabriel is.
Yeah, go for it. I want to hear it.
So, early Buddhism, yes, he's got early Buddhism, like, Pali Canon stuff. He's got it on the books when he says that. He
Hmm.
has read it and he knows it and he gets it. He's
Hmm.
there. Um, the Buddha was born as a regular person, and then he lived as a regular. And when I say a regular person, I know he was a prince, but he was regular in the sense that he was much closer to all of us than to a god or a universal being.
Hmm.
So he lived like all of us and he practiced, and then he had an experience which transformed him into not being like all of us because he had under his hat the knowledge of the entire universe, the source code of the entire universe. And he was teaching about it and talking about it and making claims about it. And so, by early Buddhist standards, yes, that was a mystical noetic experience. By later Buddhist standards, I would argue that it is not a noetic experience. You could say it's a mystical experience. I have no problem with that descriptor, but it
Ah, okay.
doesn't it doesn't tell you something that is not already there in front of you. The problem or the intrigue of mystical noetic experiences is like who sent the email? Does that make sense? Or where did the email come from? Whenever Muhammad went out into the desert and he claims to have met the angel Gabriel, um,
Mhm.
who sent that message? Who got that to him? Where did that information come from? Did it come from somewhere that is capital T true and is fundamental to reality? Or did it come from hallucinations? Was it, you know what I mean? Like, where does this mystical knowledge actually come from? And what is the content? And
Right.
so in Western religions, mystical experiences and noetic experiences are very common. Um, and they follow a formula. Somebody who is alone meets an angel or a holy divine being, and that being gives them knowledge that they didn't have before. And so it's like, how could they have learned this stuff if not for speaking with an angel when they come
Hmm.
back from that experience and start teaching? In the case of Buddhism, especially later Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, the truth of Buddha nature, the truth of Buddhahood, the truth of the Bodhisattva path, the truth of the Dharma is taught to be, and I'm not saying this is true or not true, I'm just saying how it's presented. It's presented and taught to be all around us all the time. And so an enlightenment experience is reaching a level of spiritual advancement, but it stops being a narrative of receiving knowledge from somewhere else in Mahayana Buddhism. It stops being like that because it's all laid out in front of you. In a post Shakyamuni world, after he's passed away, which is where most of Buddhism takes place, historically and religiously, the Dharma's there for you. And you just have to read it all and do it all in order to reach enlightenment, in order to reach Buddhahood. The monk at my temple, he describes himself as having had an enlightenment experience. He was visiting the Ajanta caves in India, very important Buddhist site, and he was prostrating before an icon of the Buddha in cave number 10 of the Ajanta caves. And while prostrated, while fully on the ground, he began to shake really hard and he couldn't get up, he couldn't move, he couldn't control his body. And he heard in what he says is the Buddha's voice, let all beings be happy, let them be comfortable, let them dance.
Hmm.
And he didn't think this himself. He says that this was a voice speaking to him. It was the Buddha speaking to him. And that is, to me, a mystical experience, but it is not a noetic experience because the content of it is in every sutra.
Gotcha.
And
And
so it's interesting to think about. It's interesting to split those hairs, and I think that you sort of have to when you're talking about religions.
yeah, no, I think so too. The other thing I would say is that it at least based on the content that he described, it sounds like it's speaking not to, you know, here's this thing that you should know, or here's that this teaching that you should pass on to other people in an intellectual sense. It's pointing to the immediacy of experience.
Hmm.
dance, feel comfortable, feel happy, um, as opposed to um, again this noetic quality of um, there is some sort of esoteric knowledge in the sense of like a sentence that you should say that says something about the universe, and instead it brings you to the immediacy of the moment. Uh,
Hmm.
is that kind of what you were getting at, or
Yeah, it speaks to a religious truth that did not come from somewhere else. It came from here, so to speak, but it was spoken in the voice of the Buddha, you could say, for his mystical experience. But what I'm saying is, he didn't learn something new. It changed his behavior and changed his life and changed his practice as a Buddhist monk. But he didn't learn something that he had not been told before. We
Mhm,
in Buddhism, whenever you read the sutras, whenever you practice, you're told about compassion, you're told about loving kindness, you're told about, you know, pity and universal compassion for all sentient beings all the time, right? So you know about it, but that mystical experience just sort of was a deeper internalization of those truths for him rather than the revelation of a new truth.
mm,
And so, in that regard, we must say, in response to Justin Sledge, not all Buddhist enlightenment experiences are noetic. They're all mystical, but they're not all noetic. And
okay.
we need to make that distinction because Mahayana Buddhism is the most practiced Buddhism in the world today,
Hmm.
above Vajrayana and above Theravada. And most of Buddhist history since Shakyamuni died has been sort of Mahayana history. And
Hmm.
he is right for older Buddhism, he's right for early Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, but you have to speak to more than just that for the
Hmm.
truth of it. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's an important distinction.
Hmm.
Um, However, the rhetoric of enlightenment, as we described it in Evan Thompson's book, um, up to this point, the rhetoric of enlightenment is noetic in a sense, because you have a moment where you suddenly realize or come to know or are revealed somehow the karmic past, present, and future of all sentient beings, and the source code, the truth, the ultimate truth of ultimate reality, etc. Um, and so the rhetoric is still noetic, but it's not that way in real life all the time.
Hmm. Gotcha. Okay. I think I see what you're getting at, and it kind of makes sense. It almost goes back to at some point in the video he was talking about um very much in the spirit of Evan Thompson. I mean, kind of as we were saying, I feel like a lot of this for religious scholars anyway, it's kind of like 101 type stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but it's important because people are becoming very interested in mystical experiences, especially with psychedelics and all the research going on with classical psychedelics and meditation. And that's when he talks about the cultural context in which these experiences happen. And yeah, I guess if you had uh, any thoughts there in terms of cosmopolitanism, and you know, maybe you'll just agree with it. But yeah, I'm curious to know like what you thought of that as it pertains to looking at mystical experiences in the world at large.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is something that he says, and I agree with it. He says that you can't throw out the validity and the veridity of mystical experiences solely based on the fact that they are culturally mediated and culturally moderated. So importantly, to get specific, we're saying just because, you know, Muhammad had an experience with angels, and angels are part of an Abrahamic cosmology, which is specific to a time and place in history and in culture. Just because of that, we can't say that all mystical experiences are invalid or untrue.
Hmm.
Similarly, the three watches of the night in Buddhism, where he fought off armies of demons sent by the god of temptation, Mara. Mara existed before Buddhism, and all of those demons existed in the cosmology. Similarly, it's culturally contextualized. Just because of that, we can't throw out the entire Buddhist Dharma entirely.
Yeah.
I agree with that completely. I think that um, he puts it in a very interesting way when he says that, um, we see these culturally contextualized mystical experiences, and we see the contradictions that flow out from their experiences, and we want to say none of them are true because they all contradict each other. The
Hmm.
stuff that Muhammad says contradicts what the Buddha says, and contradicts what Confucius says, and contradicts, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
And because of that, they had a mystical experience, but it doesn't say anything real or true about reality. He says that that doesn't really work out because challenging contradictions is a modern problem. It's a
Hmm.
modern issue. And many of these traditions are internally contradictory sometimes as well. And so, if contradictions are your standard, if you're prioritizing that sort of, internal coherence and external coherence, then you're not going to get very far.
Hmm.
I think that's important. I think that accepting and living with contradictions when understanding and interpreting mystical experiences, but also just in life in general, is very, very crucial because contradictions create a binary of right and wrong, possible and impossible, true and false, past and present, or past and future. They create basically false binaries and dichotomies, which have really, they don't really capture all of what reality is up to and all about. And I think that accepting those contradictions and moving past them somehow is crucial to understanding and unpacking the value that mystical experiences have, and to unpacking what people who have mystical experiences go on to say and do,
Hmm.
because the contradictions don't matter. The cultural context may lead to potential contradictions, but that's okay. Just because you see that, that's not a keep out sign. You know,
Hmm.
Philosophy and religion and anthropology and all these other fields of scholarship should just jump that fence and just get in it. And it might be hard, it might be tricky, it might be messy in there, but it's nonetheless going to be valuable because um, whether something agrees or does not agree in your modern Western logical mind doesn't have anything to do with sort of the impact and, as Justin Sledge says, the capital T truth of what these people are saying. It doesn't have anything to do with that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I completely agree with all that. And uh, that kind of brings me to the ethical dimension of cosmopolitanism. So, towards the end of the video, and I think this is very true, especially at this point in time in global history, or in terms of the world's current state of affairs. He says that historically mystics have been among the most socially and religiously conservative factions of religion.
Mhm.
And so tying that to ethics then, um, you know, essentially what I'm saying, and he mentions this at one point. He says that we're kind of imposing anachronistically these um ethical or moral standards of liberal enlightenment that we kind of see, starting in the European Enlightenment, onto other cultures. Um, and I get that, and it's important to be cognizant of that bias. But if you look at the the genocide that's occurring in Gaza right now, I mean that's a fundamentalist religious enterprise of settler colonialism, and um, that's just literally what it is, and it's the religious interpretation that um, a certain group of people have the right to a certain area of land, and it is based very much in this real belief, this real religious belief, this and so where I'm going with all of that is, and the same is true of manifest destiny in American
Hmm.
history. Um, is it okay to impose our m- modern Western values of, let's just say, liberalism in general, onto these religious frameworks at the level of, I guess, like politics and social policy? Because I feel like it is. I don't think it's safe or fair to just say, well, that's your religious belief. You can't do anything about it. Um, and yeah, like navigating that, I think is there has to be some uh container within which to exist, and to me that's the idea of nonviolence, no displacement of human beings, no, you know, very basic stuff, but um I don't know, is there anything that you can make out of that or articulate a little better?
Sort of, yeah. I think I get what you're pointing to. So whenever he says that, we're imposing a 21st century liberal Western perspective on this stuff, he's speaking to valuing multiculturalism, and he's speaking to valuing, diversity of religion and diversity of just ways of living and ways of speaking and ways of looking and ways of doing, and
Hmm.
valuing, the melting pot, so to speak. And he is correct that those are 21st century liberal values. Um, but it is not correct to think that the simple premise of do no harm is a 21st century liberal perspective. And
Yeah.
so if we look back on mystics and on mystical experiences and on um, what religious people do with the outflows from people who have mystical experiences and so on and so forth. And we see stuff like the genocide in Gaza, and we see stuff um, like the 12 Crusades, and we see these horrible acts of violence that are carried out in the name of religion, in the name of, you know, sort of Gnostic or mystical knowledge that's come to somebody. Um, it's not, I think he says it's kind of, we shouldn't apply this, this liberal perspective onto those things. But like I
Yeah.
said, saying do no harm is not doing that. Do no
Yeah.
harm is not making the mistake of, taking our current sensibilities and anachronistically applying them. Um, and so in that way, I think he's kind of wrong about that. Do no harm has been around for way longer than the European Enlightenment.
Yeah.
And it's just that simple. I mean, you can
And to
philosophize and
be,
you can, oh, go ahead.
yeah, and to be clear, he's a fairly progressive man himself.
Oh, of
I'm
course.
not
Yeah.
saying that he's saying that, but just for people listening, he does stuff on not gender non-conforming people throughout
Of course.
religious history. Um, but I mean, I was just clarifying. I don't, I wasn't, I didn't, I completely agree with what you're saying. Go on.
Yeah. I was just saying that, uh, you know, you can philosophize and you can sort of dissect and contextualize any sort of moral or ethical argument into its cultural and historical situation. Um, but it doesn't make it any less true in a lot of cases. So, like, he brings Kant into the discussion, and we can bring the Buddha into the discussion because he's a moral philosopher in a way, and we can bring Jesus into the discussion. Yeah, you can say that, Kant, Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad, they all had their specific cultural contexts, which led them to come up with doctrines like the Golden Rule or like ahimsa or
Mhm.
like benevolence or like godliness, whatever. You can pull these things apart all the time, but the simple truth, the simple claim of do no harm is central to all of them, for one, and
Mhm.
it's also just true. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't you could write me a million pages in philosophical text, a million pages dissecting and diagnosing and tearing apart and contesting and challenging and poking and prodding at the simple claim of do no harm. And I will not read it because I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Do no
Yeah.
harm. That's just
Yeah.
that simple. It's just that simple. And so it's important that, like, at the very minimum, that's the guiding principle for how we sort of hold accountable the outflows from mystical and noetic religious experiences is like, okay, yeah, you can say whatever you want. I'll be a 21st century Western modern liberal, and I'll say I value the diversity of opinions and the diversity of religions and the diversity of worldviews that you bring to the table by saying and believing whatever you want about this, as long as do no harm, as long as central to all of it is do no harm. It's just, I mean, that
Yeah.
is like European Enlightenment thinking. You could say that utilitarianism or Hippocratic oath stuff is
Hmm.
very Western European, whatever, but it's shared in Asian religions as well. And it's it should be the absolute most fundamental principle. And
Yeah.
I think there's a strong argument to be made that religion exists in part to impose that sort of order, that rule on people. I think that religion is made up to afford divine credibility to a lot of claims, which are bad, but also to afford divine credibility to the claim do no harm, or
Hmm.
else XYZ will happen.
Hmm.
In Christianity, do no harm or you'll go to hell. In Buddhism, do no harm or else you go to Buddhist hell,
Yeah.
or because it's bad karma. You
Yeah.
know, they have all these different sort of carrots and sticks, right? But universally, it's sort of do no harm among all of them. And because of that, I think that it transcends the whole discussion of, well, you can't really apply Enlightenment thinking, you can't really apply liberal thinking because it's fundamental to the human condition.
Yeah. Um, yeah, you put that beautifully, Nick. And I appreciate that insight. And at a certain level, like I feel this part of me that's kind of like, well, that's pretty basic. And it is, but also, there's the reality of what's happening in Gaza right now. And I think we mentioned this last time in our discussion. Like diversity of opinions. Yes, we can all have differing and very disagreeable opinions on religion and politics and whatever, but there has to be um, that value of do no harm central to it at the root of it all. Um, and that's going to be important coming up because at this point, I think the reality is that a two-state solution is pretty much off the table at this point. Um, Whatever it's going to be moving forward, um, that's that's going to require actual discussions to happen and actual disagreements to happen that are going to have real life ramifications on people's livelihoods, but um, has to have at its core, okay, we're not doing violence. Um, that's off the table. Um, so thank you for that because yeah, I think it applies not just to mystical religion or mystical experiences, but I think that mystical experiences are so powerful because of the weight of the content that they're presumed to carry. And so, yeah, great discussion. Anything else that you'd like to say about the video before we conclude here?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna I'm gonna say something that he might sneer at, or he might be, annoyed at me saying, or might be skeptical of me saying. Um, it is unfair to be unduly skeptical and cynical. This is prelude. It's not me saying the thing. It's unfair to be unduly skeptical and cynical to people who have mystical experiences and be like, you didn't have that, or I know better than whatever noesis you had from that. And he's right to say that. He says that, and he's right to say that. Um, Regardless, I'm going to make a claim. All people who have mystical experiences from which the outflows are not based on a principle of do no harm are lying.
Mm.
I believe that they are lying. Whenever somebody goes into a secluded place and they come back and they claim they had an experience where an angel told them that women belong in the kitchen, or that they had an experience that said that people from this place or people that are this color should be killed or displaced. I believe that they already thought that and they went into this secluded place just for a while and then came back and they said that an angel or a spirit or the universe told that shit to them just so that they could elevate their stupid, shitty claims to the level of divine credibility. So it's no longer just some guy saying it. It's now God. It's now the universe saying it.
Yeah.
On
No,
the other hand,
yeah.
all people who have mystical experiences and outflows of noesis from that, which are principles of do no harm, such as I had an experience of the interconnectedness of all sentient beings. I had an experience which impressed upon me the importance of ahimsa, nonviolence. I had a mystical experience which, the Buddha said to me, let all beings be happy, let all beings be comfortable, let all beings dance. Those are the ones that I truly actually believe happened and are true. All
Mhm.
others, the person is a liar, a big fucking liar.
Yeah, no, Nick, bravo, bravo. Like seriously, I wanted to say that at some point. I forget when. So I'm so glad that you did because it's like I think the one of the biggest dangers is this relativity of, oh, well, you had this mystical experience and you saw this vision and oh, okay, so we'll accept this as if it's uh, we'll presuppose that in any way this was even a sensible idea to begin with, which it
Mhm.
wasn't. If the content of the experiences, enslavement or uh, genocide or and not just current events, but historically that this group of people is superior to this group. Um, yeah, I appreciate it so much because I think that as people, especially progressives, there is this tendency, like you're saying, towards multiculturalism and respect everyone's opinion. And it's like, okay, yes, that, but also, at the same time, to have with it this very, I would say, just human value of do no harm, and to call bullshit. Like, no,
Mhm.
you didn't have that. The angel didn't tell you that it's okay to take black people on ships and displace them and put them here and enslave them, or that it's okay to genocide the entire Americas so that white settlers could live here. Uh, I don't think that happened either. To the extent that I do believe in spirituality, it just no, it doesn't line up with any of those historical interpretations that you're talking about. So,
And
uh,
because Justin Sledge said that, cultural contexts are so important um, in sort of evaluating and understanding mystical experiences, but also cannot thus, cut them out. It's important to realize that, people have had mystical experiences and have come from contexts of rampant sexism, racism, rampant ethnocentrism, rampant greed, rampant, ideologies which are harmful, and then had a mystical experiences which then elevated those to divine levels of capital T truth and divine levels of, you know, enforcement, so to speak.
mhm,
And it's important to remember, and that's kind of why I think that Dr. Sledge would sneer at me or be weird at me, for saying that I think that all of the hateful ones are all lying and all of the do no harm ones aren't, is because he would just say, well, you're just cultured into a context where do no harm is you know what you prioritize as a principle for evaluating morality and stuff.
yeah.
And it's
But
like,
I would
yeah,
say
I
you're looking
am.
at it. I would say you're looking at it at a deeper level, though. It's like maybe those people's cultures did tell them that, women belong in the kitchen, and that's why they justified it with this quote unquote mystical experience. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that they weren't already thinking that,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and even if he did say that, I don't care. Like I said, he could say you're a target. He says philosophy means everybody's a target, and he's right. He's
Hmm.
right. You know, Dissecting arguments and claims, no matter who makes them or no matter what the claims are, that is a task in philosophy. But I don't care.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, this was a really cool conversation, and I thought the end was super interesting, tying cosmopolitanism into it, um, especially. Do you have any last thoughts on Shingon Buddhism or the video that we discussed?
I would just recommend that anybody who is interested more in Shingon, you can read translations of Kukai's major works by Hakeda Yoshito. You can also read a monograph written about Kukai's life, written by Abe Ryuichi from Harvard. I believe that the title of that is uh, Weaving the Mantra, the life and works of Kukai, or something along the lines. The Weaving of Mantra is the main title.
Mhm.
And read that if you're more interested, and look up these pictures of the mandalas and start to, look at some diagrams where you see who is where and stuff like that. And it'll be fascinating. It's a fun rabbit hole to fall down. I fell down it, and I'm not out. I'm never gonna be out. I'm
Yeah,
making it my career. And so check that
I'd say
stuff
that's a
out.
good rabbit hole to be in.
Exactly. Yeah. And so check that stuff out, and I think you'll like it.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you as always. I had wanted to talk a little bit about Kukai, but I think we're out of time here. Um, would you be interested in discussing that for a future video, kind of how he pulls all this different stuff together and makes something incredibly beautiful and certainly novel? Um, yeah, would that be a decent topic?
Absolutely, absolutely. For people who are listening, I've been trying to, gently steer our next book review thing into reading passages of Kukai's works from
Oh,
Hakeda
oh yeah.
Yoshito and picking one of them, and that's the one that we talk about for an episode. So yes, yes, the answer is absolutely yes.
Would you want to read Shogi Jisogi, something like that? The
Shoji Itsogi, yeah. So that's one of them. I was thinking that we could go through the whole book.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's actually pretty short. And the passages themselves are fairly short, but there's a lot in them, as you can imagine. So
Okay.
yeah, I would be more than willing. And I'd also just be willing to talk about Kukai's life in general, his biography, because that's also very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I see him as a very syncretic guy, and
Mhm.
yeah, I'd love to talk about his method because it seems very much in the spirit of, consilience in his own historical context.
Absolutely.
Um, so awesome. Well, we got some cool shows coming up. Everyone, thank you for watching. Nick, it was good to see you, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me on, and I'll see you all next time.
All right. Take care, everyone.